The Legend of Zelda's Ocarina of Time was the 3D blueprint for the vast majority of adventure games in the 2000s and onward, redefining gameplay systems and setting a standard for future generations of games. At the time, it was considered by many to be a masterpiece and flawless. Even now, it is still regarded as a masterpiece despite showing its considerable age. Close behind Ocarina, Majora's Mask is often praised for taking so much of what Ocarina did and completely flipping it on its head in creative and original ways, while still leveraging the solid fundamental gameplay that made its predecessor so successful. However, it pains me to see just how badly the gameplay has aged. Unfortunately, unless you have past experience with Zelda games, or a lot of patience, you may find Majora's Mask to be every bit as frustrating as it is groundbreaking. Majora's Mask is a direct sequel, yet the stakes are arguably more dire. Ocarina had you embark on this grand adventure, rescuing a princess, defeating a dark evil, but in contrast, Majora's Mask initially has you go after a stolen mask by some shit-faced skull kid. Not quite the same, right? At least on the surface. As the game progresses and you peel back the layers, you start to see what's really at stake. The stark difference in vibe becomes apparent almost immediately. Aside from having a fairy, attacking, using various equipment, or playing an ocarina to affect the world around you, there are vast differences in Majora's gameplay loop. You'll get different masks that directly impact gameplay and how others engage with you. Now, these masks will radically transform your being, giving you certain skills or abilities. In Ocarina, it was a simple color change to your tunic, but in Majora's, it's a full-on body transformation, or just a cute parody of a Halloween costume. Now, curiously, Majora's Mask does not deal with any of the core elements that you would expect from a Zelda game. It does not take place in Hyrule, but in a parallel world known as Termina, there is no Zelda to rescue, and there's no Ganondorf to defeat. You're just trying to rescue a random village and its residents from a creepy moon and impending apocalypse. There is a recurring character from Ocarina, and he is just as creepy as any other NPC from either game. And then there's the varied inhabitants of the Clock Town area, which bring a similar vibe and energy to Majora's, just like it did in Ocarina. It relishes its rich variety of side quests first, involving the residents of Termina. Despite the quirky and humorous nature of these side quests, make no mistake though, this game is not nearly as fantastical or chipper as Ocarina. This game is f***ing sad. Loss, regret, existential dread, psychedelic acid trip visuals, and impending destruction, they all loom large and heavy, to the point where I often asked out loud, is this a kid's game? Ocarina had 5 temples with several caverns and a full mini-temple inside the belly of a giant sea beast. Majora's only has 4 temples, but each felt deeper and more complex than Ocarina, with the risk that you would have to replay these temples if you ran out of time. And when I say time, I'm talking about Majora's core identity, its time loop. The concept of time in Majora's Mask goes beyond the simple day-night cycle from Ocarina. A unique 3-day cycle is incorporated into the game where you have only 72 in-game hours to save the world from doom. This time can be reset using your ocarina, but the consequence is that almost all of your progress gets wiped out. Now, this literal time loop turns into a Groundhog Day type narrative where NPCs you encounter will not recognize you, but your actions can shift the dynamic of your progression. For example, in an early part you need a secret code to get past a kid, which you can only get by popping a balloon. If you need to do this again, you can skip the steps and just give the code straight away. Now, the doom in question is a literal moon, crashing down to crush everyone on the eve of the town festival. To prevent this, you must rescue guardians trapped in temples by evil spirit masks. These temples, each with their own aesthetic, involve solving puzzles and racing against the clock. As the game progresses, your command over the time loop will grow stronger thanks to the ocarina. You'll learn songs that affect the time loop, like the Song of Double Time to skip ahead, the Inverted Song of Time to slow down, and a Warp Song for fast travel. The Song of Time itself will reset the game state to the beginning of the 3-day cycle, which also serves as your way to save the game. Until you develop this command, the time loop is nothing more than a hindrance though, and is a little blatantly unfun. A demoralizing amount of progress gets wiped out, and retracing your steps becomes a chore. However, the more that you play, the more shortcuts the game will map out for you, which will make retracing your steps a little bit easier as time goes on. Fulfilling certain quests, and you can skip steps on repeats. Bosses and temples, once they're defeated, will have warp tunnels, meaning you can go straight to the boss upon reset. But then when it comes to how the game plays, unfortunately the fundamentals of Ocarina are still here, which means that aged gameplay serves as Majora's Mask's backbone. The only thing that salvaged the gameplay experience for me was save scumming with the Nintendo Switch Online's use of save states. This mitigated issues from the aged gameplay, which were shitty controls, navigation, platforming, and a, quite frankly, dog-shit camera. The ability to retry all of these almost immediately saved the experience for me. Despite the era holding the game back, the experimentation was actually really cool despite being imperfect. The different masks and their effect on gameplay opened up many possibilities. Minor effects like automatically attracting fairies, pursuing certain quests, or making traversal easier were enjoyable. The big three masks, like the Deku, Goron, and Zora, offered unique transformations and abilities, which did add novelty to the game. The dungeons, the peak of Zelda games, were creative and challenging. Grabbing all the fairies despite being difficult was rewarding with buffs like extra health or damage resistance. The varied and distinct dungeon locations did keep the progression fresh. However, the repeated mini-bosses and the entirety of the water dungeon were annoying. The NPC quests and quest logs sometimes had lengthy pauses to the main game progression, but they weren't enough to sully the air of mystery. Humorous moments in the game made it particularly fun when I streamed the game to my friend who loved Majora's Mask, and it made the experience enjoyable for me. When you wrap it all up, the coolest part about Majora's Mask is its setup. The mystique and dire stakes combined brilliantly, surprising and intriguing me. The premise and fascinating lore held their own merit, and I was most impressed by the production choices and the risk that Nintendo took in creating this game after Ocarina's success. The varied masks and added gameplay changes were enjoyable, even if not all smooth, and of course the save states and playing for my friends made it all just a bit better. But that's about as far as it goes with what I liked. Every pitfall and fault from Ocarina is glaring here, with added setbacks from Majora's Mask's experimental nature. The game's restrictions and boundaries from the N64 era led to a pure headache, unless you know what you're signing up for. At the end of the day, it is a kid's game, with a moral of, the friends you made along the way at the end. If you loved Ocarina and Majora, you are still very much valid. There is nothing fundamentally wrong with enjoying these games, and they are still worth their place in history. If you're playing them for the first time after a lifetime with modern games, be warned. It feels like as long as you know what to expect, you will hopefully still have a great time. And despite it feeling okay to me at best, my hope for you is that it will be life-changing, just like it was for so many before us. Until next time.